Wealth can buy a private island, a fleet of jets, and an army of politicians, but it couldn't buy Victoria Sterling, her daughter's legs back. When a struggling single father stepped into their gilded cage, his unorthodox methods didn't just heal a broken body, they shattered a billionaire's pristine empire. Victoria Sterling did not cry. Crying was a biological inefficiency, a waste of moisture and time that the CEO of Vanguard Medical Innovations could ill afford. Sitting at the head of a 20-foot mahogany conference table in her Manhattan high-rise, she possessed the kind of power that could topple small governments or dictate global healthcare policies. Yet, as she stared at the glowing brain scans projected onto the glass wall, she had never felt more entirely impotent. "The nerve pathways are completely dormant, Miss Sterling," Dr. Richard Alston murmured, his voice laced with the cautious deference one used when handling live explosives. He was the head of neurology at Johns Hopkins, the 7th world-class specialist Victoria had flown in this year. The trauma to the T12 vertebra from the riding accident was catastrophic. "Chloe is paralyzed from the waist down. We have tried the stem cell treatments. We have tried the experimental exoskeletons. You have to start preparing her for a permanent life in the chair." "You are dismissed, Richard," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "Victoria, please, you have to accept reality," I said. "You are dismissed. Leave your security badge with my assistant." As the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind the doctor, Victoria buried her face in her manicured hands. Her daughter, Chloe, was 19. Before the horse had thrown her and crushed her spine during a show-jumping competition in Wellington, she had been a vibrant, fiercely independent girl. Now, Chloe was a ghost haunting the corridors of their sprawling Greenwich estate, radiating a bitter, silent rage that was slowly tearing them both apart. Victoria had spent $40 million over the past 16 months trying to fix her. Nothing worked. The billionaire could solve any corporate crisis, but she could not stitch her daughter's nervous system back together. It was her head of private security, a former MI6 operative named David, who slid a thin manila folder across her desk later that evening. "I know you told me to monitor the black market biotech forums," David said quietly. "I found something. Or rather, someone. He's not a doctor. He's a mechanic turned physical therapist. Operates out of a retrofitted auto garage in a brutalist neighborhood in South Boston." Victoria opened the folder. Inside was a surveillance photograph of a man in his late 30s. He wore grease-stained jeans, a faded t-shirt, and had dark, unkempt hair. Beside him stood a young boy, no older than 7, clutching a worn-out backpack. "His name is Liam Hayes," David continued. 3 years ago, his wife was involved in a head-on collision with a drunk driver. She suffered a traumatic brain injury and severe paralysis. Liam couldn't afford the medical bills, so he built a neuromuscular stimulation rig in his garage using salvaged robotics and conductive mesh. The medical board called it a severe safety hazard and revoked his physiotherapy license. His wife passed away from an unrelated aneurysm before he could finish the prototype. Since then, he's been taking on hopeless cases under the table. And Victoria. His patients walk out of that garage. Victoria's eyes locked onto the grainy image of Liam Hayes. She didn't care about his revoked license. She didn't care that he was a single father struggling to keep the lights on. She only saw a variable that hadn't been tested yet. Less than 24 hours later, Victoria's armored Maybach pulled up to the rusted roll-up doors of Hayes Kinetics. The contrast was absurd. A pristine black monolith of wealth parked amidst cracked asphalt and graffiti-covered brick. Victoria stepped out, her designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement, and walked straight into the garage. The air inside smelled of ozone, coffee, and sweat. Liam Hayes was hunched over a workbench, soldering a circuit board, while his son, Noah, sat on a torn leather sofa doing math homework. Liam didn't look up as Victoria's shadow fell over his workbench. "We're closed," Liam said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "And whatever you're selling, I can't afford it." "I am Victoria Sterling," she announced, expecting the name to carry its usual weight. Liam finally paused, setting the soldering iron down. He wiped a smudge of grease from his forehead with the back of his hand and looked at her. His eyes were a striking, piercing blue, hardened by a grief that Victoria recognized all too well. "I know who you are. Vanguard Medical. You bought out the company that manufactured my wife's life support machines and jacked up the price of the proprietary filters by 400%. Victoria didn't flinch. "I am here about my daughter, Chloe. She has a T12 spinal cord injury. I want to hire you." Liam let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I don't work for billionaires. I don't work for people who treat human lives like stock options. The door is behind you. I will give you $5 million right now," Victoria said evenly, pulling a sleek black checkbook from her designer bag. "Tax-free. And if she walks again, I will give you $20 million. You and your son will never have to worry about a single thing for the rest of your lives. You can build your machines in a state-of-the-art laboratory instead of this rotting garage." Liam looked at the checkbook, then over at Noah, who was watching them with wide, curious eyes. Noah's sneakers were held together with duct tape. The heating bill was 3 months past due. The desperation in Liam's chest warred with his principles. "Keep your money," Liam said softly, stepping closer to Victoria until she had to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. "I don't want your millions, but I will take the case on 3 conditions. First, you fund a free clinic in this neighborhood, fully staffed, under my son's name. Second, Noah and I move into your estate, so I have 24-hour access to the patient. And third, when I am in the room with your daughter, you have absolutely zero authority. I am the boss. You do not interrupt. You do not question my methods, and you do not intervene. Do we have a deal, Miss Sterling?" Victoria's jaw tightened. She was used to absolute control. Handing over her fragile daughter to this rough, abrasive stranger felt like a severe miscalculation. But she saw the cold, unyielding resolve in Liam's eyes. He wasn't intimidated by her wealth. "Deal," Victoria said, extending her hand. Liam didn't shake it. He just turned to his son. "Pack your bags, buddy. We're moving to Connecticut." The Sterling estate in Greenwich was a sprawling 20,000-square-foot fortress of glass and limestone, surrounded by immaculate gardens and high-security walls. For Liam and Noah, who had been living in a cramped, drafty apartment above the garage, the guest house they were assigned felt like a 5-star hotel. But Liam hadn't come for the luxury. He had come to do a job. On the first morning, Liam bypassed the sterile, hospital-grade rehabilitation room Victoria had built in the East Wing. Instead, he instructed the estate staff to clear out an old, dusty greenhouse at the edge of the property. He had them haul in heavy iron weights, thick climbing ropes, and the salvaged wire-covered contraption he called the K-rig. When Chloe was finally wheeled into the greenhouse by her private nurse, she looked like a porcelain doll trapped in a steel cage. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but her eyes were hollow, rimmed with dark circles of depression and resentment. "What is this garbage dump?" Chloe snapped, eyeing the makeshift equipment with intense disdain. She glared at Liam. "And who the hell are you? The gardener?" "I'm Liam. I'm your new mechanic," he said casually, tossing a heavy leather medicine ball from hand to hand. "Mechanic? I'm not a car, you idiot. My spine is severed. I've had the best doctors in Switzerland tell me my legs are dead flesh. My mother is wasting her time, and you are wasting mine. Take me back to my room," she ordered her nurse. "The nurse leaves," Liam commanded. "From now on, it's just you, me, and the rig." Victoria, who had been standing in the doorway monitoring the exchange, took a step forward, her protective instincts flaring. "Mr. Hayes, I hardly think this environment is sanitary for—" "Condition 3, Victoria," Liam interrupted sharply, pointing a grease-stained finger at her. "You have no authority here. Out!" Victoria's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits, but she forced herself to pivot on her heels and walk out, taking the bewildered nurse with her. For the next 2 weeks, the greenhouse became a battleground. Liam's methods were terrifyingly raw. He didn't use soothing voices or gentle stretches. He strapped Chloe into the K-rig, a heavy, uncomfortable vest wired with neurotransmitters that sent sharp, electrical impulses directly into her paralyzed muscles. He forced her to bear her own weight, letting her hang suspended while he yelled at her to push back. "You're a sadist!" Chloe screamed on the 8th day, tears of frustration streaming down her face as her legs buckled beneath her in the harness. "I can't feel them. I can't feel anything, you psycho." "You're not trying to feel them. You're just waiting for a miracle," Liam barked back, turning up the dial on the transmitter. "You're a spoiled billionaire's kid who is used to throwing money at problems until they go away. Well, your money can't flex a muscle. Only your brain can do that. Fire the signal, Chloe. Fight for it." The psychological warfare was brutal. Victoria watched it all on the estate's closed-circuit security cameras from her home office, her fingernails digging into her palms until they bled. She wanted to fire him. She wanted to have David throw him off the property. But every time she moved toward the phone, she stopped. Because despite the tears and the screaming, Chloe was alive. For the first time in 16 months, her daughter wasn't staring blankly at a wall. She was fighting. She was furious. The only solace Chloe found was in Liam's son, Noah. After the grueling afternoon sessions, Noah would sneak into the greenhouse with a pair of comic books or a battered remote control car. He didn't look at Chloe with the suffocating pity that her mother and the staff did. To Noah, she was just a cool older girl with a neat chair. "My dad yells a lot," Noah told her one evening as they sat on the greenhouse floor, Noah fixing a wheel on his toy car while Chloe iced her shoulders. "He used to yell at my mom, too, when she was sick, but he didn't mean it. He just gets mad at the broken parts because he thinks he can fix everything." Chloe looked at the young boy, her hardened exterior softening. "He couldn't fix your mom?" Noah shook his head, keeping his eyes on the toy. "No, but he promised me he'd fix you." The breakthrough, when it happened, was violent and entirely accidental. It was week 4. The Connecticut rain was hammering against the glass roof of the greenhouse. Liam had pushed Chloe harder than ever, forcing her to stand in the rig for 2 hours straight while throwing the medicine ball at her chest to test her core balance. Chloe was exhausted, shaking with fatigue, drenched in sweat. "I'm done," Chloe gasped. "Liam, please, I'm slipping." "5 more catches," Liam demanded, throwing the ball hard. Chloe caught it, but the force pushed her backward. The damp floor of the greenhouse offered no traction. Her wheelchair had been pushed to the far corner. The safety catch on the rig, a worn metal carabiner, suddenly snapped under the sudden shift in weight. Chloe plummeted. She hit the concrete floor hard, her legs twisting awkwardly beneath her. The heavy medicine ball crashed down directly onto her right kneecap. Victoria, who had been watching the monitors, saw the fall. A sound of pure terror ripped from the billionaire's throat. She bolted from her office, sprinting across the manicured lawn in the pouring rain, her designer suit soaked in seconds. She burst through the greenhouse doors, flanked by her security team. "Get away from her!" Victoria screamed, shoving Liam backward with surprising force. "I'm calling the police! You've killed her, you absolute animal!" Liam stood frozen, staring at the floor. He hadn't moved to help Chloe up. His eyes were wide, fixated on the girl sprawled on the concrete. "Mom," Chloe whispered. Victoria dropped to her knees, frantically checking her daughter's head for blood. "It's okay, sweetheart, I've got you. David, call an ambulance." "Mom, stop!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. She wasn't looking at Victoria. She was staring down at her own legs. She was gripping her right knee, her knuckles white. "Chloe?" Victoria asked, freezing. Chloe looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, terror, and a blazing, overwhelming awe. Tears were freely spilling down her cheeks. "It burns," Chloe sobbed, clutching her leg. "Mom, my knee. It hurts so bad. I can feel the pain." The greenhouse fell into a stunned, deafening silence, save for the rain drumming on the glass. Victoria looked from Chloe's hand gripping her knee to Liam, who was quietly turning off the power to the severed rig. Sensation had returned. Victoria Sterling, the woman who never cried, the cold, calculating billionaire who viewed emotions as a liability, collapsed onto the damp concrete floor. She pulled her daughter into her arms, buried her face in Chloe's shoulder. and let out a raw, broken sob that shook her entire empire to its core. The immediate aftermath of the incident in the greenhouse was a blur of flashing lights and frantic barking orders. A private medical helicopter touched down on the expansive south lawn of the Sterling estate, its rotors violently whipping the rain into a frenzy. Paramedics loaded Chloe onto a titanium stretcher. But for the first time in over a year, she was not looking at the sky with deadened apathy. She was gripping the side rails, her knuckles stark white, whispering the word burns like it was a sacred mantra. Victoria flew with her to the Vanguard Medical Innovations private research hospital in Manhattan. Liam and Noah followed closely behind in a black SUV driven by David, the stoic head of security. The silence in the vehicle was heavy, suffocating. By midnight, Chloe was secured in an ultra-high-resolution fMRI machine. Standing in the observation room, Victoria paced the linoleum floor, a lioness trapped in a sterile cage. Dr. Richard Alston, the neurologist she had fired just weeks prior, had been dragged out of his bed in the Hamptons and flown in via a second chopper. When the digital scans materialized on the glowing monitors, Dr. Alston stopped breathing. "This is scientifically impossible," Alston whispered. Leaning so close to the screen, his breath fogged the glass. He pointed a trembling pen at a cluster of neon blue pathways lighting up the monitor. The myelin sheaths around the T12 vertebra. They aren't just scarring over. They are actively regenerating. There is fresh neuroelectrical activity, bridging the severed gap. It's weak, infinitesimal, but it's there. Victoria stepped up beside him, her reflection superimposed over the image of her daughter's healing spine. "Translate that, Richard, now." The mechanic's crude electrical stimulation didn't just force muscle contraction, Alston stammered, adjusting his glasses. The specific frequency he used, it essentially bypassed the necrotic tissue and forced the dormant nerve endings to seek each other out. It's like he jump-started a dead battery. She has localized sensation in her right patella and lower tibia. Miss Sterling, if this trajectory continues, Chloe might walk. Relief, potent and intoxicating, washed over Victoria. She turned to the heavy door where Liam was standing, arms crossed, his grease-stained boots tracking mud onto the pristine white floor. "You need to calibrate the rig," Liam said, his voice cutting through the clinical silence. He wasn't smiling. The voltage spike that caused the carabiner to snap also shorted out the primary conduction mesh. "I have to rebuild it. But to make sure I don't fry her recovering synapses, I need her original post-operative decom files from the Wellington Hospital surgery. I need to know exactly where the titanium stabilizing rods were placed so I can route the current around them." Victoria nodded instantly. "David will grant you Level 1 clearance to the Vanguard central servers. You can pull the files from the master database." It was 3:00 a.m. when Liam sat down at a glowing terminal in Vanguard's subterranean server room. Noah was asleep on a leather couch nearby, wrapped in a cashmere blanket. Liam rubbed his tired eyes, sipping lukewarm black coffee as he downloaded the massive encrypted files from Chloe's initial spinal reconstruction. As a mechanic, Liam viewed the human body as an engine. You had to look at the schematics. He pulled up the 3D rendering of Chloe's spine, isolating the metallic rods the Wellington surgeons had bolted to her vertebrae to stabilize the fracture. Something was wrong. Liam frowned, leaning closer to the screen. He highlighted the alloy composition data in the surgical report. The rods were supposed to be standard surgical-grade titanium, but the density markers on the MRI were off. They were casting a bizarre electromagnetic shadow. His fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing the serial numbers of the surgical hardware with the FDA registry database. The search returned a highly classified internal Vanguard patent. The rods in Chloe's back were not standard titanium. They were an experimental, proprietary composite called Aegis 7, manufactured by a Vanguard subsidiary. They were designed to slowly release a localized anti-inflammatory peptide to reduce post-surgical swelling. But as Liam ran the chemical composition through his own 'own diagnostic software, a horrifying reality materialized on the screen. The Aegis 7 alloy had a fatal flaw. When exposed to the natural bioelectricity of the human nervous system, the composite oxidized, emitting a continuous low-level microfrequency. Liam's blood ran cold. The frequency wasn't just harmless noise. It was a jamming signal. Chloe's spine hadn't failed to heal because the injury was too severe. It had failed to heal because the very rods Vanguard had manufactured and placed inside her back were actively paralyzing the cellular regeneration process. They were acting as an electromagnetic firewall. The K-rig had only worked because the violent surge of electricity during the fall had temporarily overloaded and shorted out the rod's frequency. "Good God!" Liam breathed, the sterile air of the server room suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. He dug deeper, bypassing 3 layers of corporate security protocols. He found an internal memo dated 18 months ago, 2 months before Chloe's accident. The memo outlined the exact neural inhibition flaw of the Aegis 7 rods during primate testing. At the bottom of the document was a digital signature authorizing the cover-up and pushing the product to human trials to secure a $3 billion military defense contract. The signature didn't belong to Victoria. It belonged to Nathaniel Reed, Vanguard's chief operating officer. The Manhattan skyline was bleeding with the pale light of dawn when Liam slammed the printed dossier onto Victoria's mahogany desk. She had been staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows, a cup of untouched tea in her hand, watching the city wake up. "Your company paralyzed your daughter," Liam said. The words were a gunshot in the quiet room. Victoria turned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Liam didn't mince words. He walked her through the schematics, the chemical breakdown of the Aegis 7 alloy, and the internal memo. He watched as the color completely drained from the billionaire's face. She picked up the paper bearing Nathaniel Reed's signature, her hands trembling violently. For a woman who commanded empires, Victoria suddenly looked incredibly small. The realization that her life's work, her legacy, was the very instrument of her child's suffering hit her with the force of a freight train. She had spent $40 million searching the globe for a cure, while the poison was sitting in her own boardroom. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He told me the Wellington surgeons insisted on the Aegis rods. He said they were the bleeding edge. He used my daughter as a human trial to protect his defense contract." "The rods have to come out," Liam said firmly. "If they stay in, the frequency will reboot, and it will kill the new nerve growth. She'll be permanently locked in the chair. But if we surgically extract them, I can use the K-rig to guide the remaining pathways. She will walk, Victoria. I swear to you." The vulnerability vanished from Victoria's eyes, replaced instantly by a terrifying Arctic rage. She reached under her desk and pressed a silent alarm. Within 10 seconds, the heavy oak doors opened, and David stepped inside, his hand resting casually near the holster beneath his suit jacket. "David," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal calm. "Lock down the building. Cancel all outgoing flights for executive personnel. And find Nathaniel Reed." But Reed was already making his move. 2 floors down, Nathaniel Reed, a slick, silver-haired executive with a penchant for ruthlessness, was staring at a blinking alert on his tablet. The Vanguard cybersecurity grid had flagged an unauthorized deep dive into the Aegis 7 black files. The terminal used was the guest login granted to the mechanic. Reed knew he was out of time. If Victoria found out about the Aegis cover-up, she wouldn't just fire him, she would have him federally indicted, and the resulting SEC fallout would vaporize the company's stock. "Get a tactical extraction team to the Greenwich estate," Reed ordered his private head of security over a burner phone. "Confiscate that garage-built machine, the K-rig, under the guise of intellectual property theft. Subpoena the mechanic's notes, and cut the power to the private hospital wing. If they can't prep the girl for surgery, we buy time to scrub the servers." At Semillon 00 a.m., the lights in Chloe's recovery room flickered and died. Emergency backup generators hummed to life, casting the sterile white walls in a sickly, dim yellow glow. Liam, who had just returned to Chloe's bedside, instantly knew what was happening. "He's trying to trap us," Liam muttered, pulling Noah closer to him. Chloe looked up from her bed, panic rising in her chest. "Liam, what's going on? Where is my mother?" Before Liam could answer, the hospital room door slammed open. 3 large men in tactical suits, bearing Vanguard corporate security badges, stepped inside. They weren't David's men. "Mr. Hayes," the lead guard said, his tone devoid of emotion. "By order of the Vanguard Board of Directors, you are in violation of corporate espionage. We are confiscating your hard drives, your schematics, and you will come with us." Liam stepped between the guards and Chloe's bed, his fists clenching. "I'm not going anywhere." "Take him," the guard ordered. Before the men could advance a single step, a deafening crack echoed through the corridor. The lead guard stumbled forward, a taser dart embedded in his shoulder, 50,000 volts dropping him to the linoleum like a sack of concrete. David stood in the doorway, a smoking taser in one hand and a suppressed 9mm pistol in the other. Behind him stood Victoria, her posture straight as a steel rod. "You are trespassing in my private ward," Victoria informed the remaining 2 guards, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "Drop your weapons, or David will put a bullet in your kneecaps, and I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your lives eating through a straw in a federal penitentiary." The guards looked at David, looked at Victoria, and slowly lowered their hands, stepping backward. "David, secure the perimeter. No one gets on this floor," Victoria commanded. She turned to Liam. "Prep her. Dr. Alston is scrubbing in. We are taking those rods out of my daughter's spine right now." "Mom," Chloe said, her voice shaking as Victoria approached the bed. "Mom, what is happening?" Victoria took her daughter's hand, pressing it to her cheek. "I'm cleaning house, my love, and I'm getting you your life back." While Chloe was wheeled into the emergency surgical theater, Victoria did not wait. She marched directly to the Vanguard executive boardroom on the top floor. The emergency board meeting had been called by Nathaniel Reed, who was currently standing at the head of the table, attempting to rally the frightened shareholders. "Miss Sterling has become emotionally compromised," Reed was saying smoothly as Victoria kicked the double doors open. "She is relying on a mechanic, a charlatan, over our own peer-reviewed science. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence to remove her as CEO." Victoria walked slowly into the room, flanked by 2 armed MI6 contractors. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She simply tossed a thick manila folder onto the center of the glass table. It slid perfectly, stopping inches from Reed's hands. "That is the unredacted primate trial data for the Aegis. 7 rods, Victoria said, the silence in the room so profound you could hear the rain hitting the windows. "Coupled with the FBI wiretap David just secured regarding your attempt to assault my daughter's hospital room. You didn't just commit corporate fraud, Nathaniel. You poisoned my child." Reed stared at the folder, the color draining from his face as the other board members began to murmur in horror. "The SEC is waiting in the lobby," Victoria continued, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. "The FDA has been notified. And Vanguard Medical Innovations is officially recalling the Aegis 7 product line, effective immediately." "You'll destroy the company," Reed spat, panic finally breaking through his slick veneer. "The stock will plummet to 0. You'll lose billions." Victoria looked at the man who had traded her daughter's legs for a defense contract. A cold, absolute smile touched her lips. "I don't care," Victoria said. "Burn it down." The surgical theater was a blinding oasis of sterile white light and the rhythmic, metronomic beeping of heart monitors. For 9 excruciating hours, Dr. Richard Alston and a hand-picked team of Vanguard's top neurosurgeons worked with agonizing precision. Their task was practically a bomb defusal. They had to carve through scar tissue to carefully unscrew and extract the oxidizing Aegis 7 titanium rods without severing the fragile, newly regenerating nerve threads Liam's machine had sparked to life. While the surgeons worked, the world outside the hospital walls erupted into absolute chaos. Victoria Sterling's ruthless execution of Vanguard Medical Innovations was swift, brutal, and utterly comprehensive. She didn't just leak the primate trial data to the SEC and the FDA. She forwarded the unredacted files, along with Nathaniel Reed's internal memos, directly to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Department of Justice. By 2:00 p.m., trading on Vanguard stock was halted globally. By 4:00 p.m., the FBI raided the corporate headquarters, dragging a pale, stammering Nathaniel Reed out of the lobby in handcuffs as news helicopters circled overhead like vultures. Decades of corporate dominance, billions of dollars in market cap, and Victoria's entire professional legacy evaporated into the Manhattan smog in a single afternoon. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, Victoria watched the financial news networks cover the collapse of her empire on a muted flat-screen television. David stood silently by the door, a stoic guardian, while Liam sat a few chairs away, idly flipping a lug nut between his grease-stained fingers. "They're calling it the greatest corporate suicide in Wall Street history," Liam observed quietly, not taking his eyes off the lug nut. "Financial analysts think you've lost your mind. Your personal net worth just took a $3 billion hit." Victoria didn't blink. She took a sip of her black coffee, her eyes reflecting the scrolling red ticker on the screen. $1 billion is just ink on a ledger, Liam. My daughter's spine is bone and tissue. I would burn 10 more companies to the ground if it meant buying her a single step. She turned to look at the mechanic. The hardened, untouchable CEO was gone. In her place was simply a mother, exhausted but fiercely resolute. "You risked everything to tell me the truth. You could have taken the $20 million I promised and walked away, letting me think her failure to heal was natural. Why didn't you?" Liam finally stopped flipping the metal nut. He looked over at the corner of the room, where Noah was curled up asleep beneath a hospital blanket. "Because my wife died, strapped to a machine built by a corporation that cared more about profit margins than human life. I couldn't fix her. But I'll be damned if I let another suit in a boardroom steal a life while I have the tools to stop it." The heavy double doors of the surgical wing finally pushed open. Dr. Alston walked out, pulling off his surgical cap. His scrubs were stained, and his eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, but the faint, undeniable shadow of a smile played on his lips. "The rods are out," Alston said, his voice raspy. "The localized inflammation was severe, but we cleared the oxidation. The neural pathways are intact. She's in recovery." It took 3 weeks for Chloe's surgical incisions to heal enough to resume physical therapy. The dynamic at the Greenwich estate had irrevocably shifted. The sterile, hospital-grade equipment Victoria had initially purchased was sold off. The greenhouse was permanently converted into haze kinetics. On a crisp Tuesday morning, the rain had given way to brilliant autumn sunshine, streaming through the glass roof. The K-rig had been meticulously rebuilt. Liam had spent sleepless nights rewiring the conductive mesh, ensuring the voltage was perfectly calibrated to stimulate the nerves without the chaotic interference of the toxic hardware that was no longer poisoning her spine. Chloe was strapped into the rig. She looked different. The hollow, bitter darkness that had haunted her eyes for 16 months was completely gone, replaced by a terrifying, beautiful spark of pure adrenaline. "All right, rich kid," Liam said, tightening the heavy leather straps across her chest. He wasn't yelling today. His voice was steady, anchoring her. "The roadblocks are gone. The interference is gone. It's just your brain and your legs. I'm going to send a microcurrent into the lower lumbar to wake up the pathways. You do the rest." Victoria stood by the door, her hands clasped so tightly together her knuckles were entirely white. Noah stood beside her, clutching his battered remote control car, watching with wide, hopeful eyes. "Powering up," Liam announced, flipping the primary breaker. A low, mechanical hum filled the greenhouse. The blue LED lights on the vest pulsed in time with Chloe's heartbeat. "I feel it," Chloe whispered, her breath hitching. "Liam, it's tingling. It feels like static electricity." "That's the bridge," Liam said softly, stepping back from the rig. "Cross it, Chloe. Push." Chloe closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in intense concentration. She didn't rely on the sudden, violent surge of a fall this time. She dug deep into her own willpower, seeking out the dormant muscles she hadn't commanded in nearly 2 years. The silence in the greenhouse was absolute, heavy with the weight of an impossible miracle. Slowly, agonizingly, the heavy steel toe of Chloe's right boot scraped against the concrete. Victoria gasped, taking a single, involuntary step forward. Chloe's eyes snapped open. She gripped the parallel support bars Liam had welded into the frame. With a guttural cry of effort, she pushed down. The servo motors of the rig whined, but they weren't lifting her, they were simply supporting her balance. The mechanical sensors on the monitor flared green. She was bearing her own weight, her right knee locked. Then, trembling violently, her left foot lifted a fraction of an inch off the ground and moved forward. She took a step. It was clumsy, heavily assisted by the bars, and incredibly small, but it was real. The space between her boot and the concrete was the greatest victory the Sterling family had ever achieved. Chloe looked up, her face flushed, tears of absolute triumph spilling over her cheeks. She looked at her mother. Victoria Sterling fell to her knees, right there in the dirt and concrete of the greenhouse. For the second time in her life, the billionaire wept. But these were not tears of grief or terror. They were the shattered, overwhelmed sobs of a woman who had just watched her daughter rise from the dead. Victoria crawled forward, wrapping her arms around Chloe's trembling legs, burying her face against her knees as Chloe reached down, her own tears falling into her mother's hair. "You did it, Mom," Chloe sobbed, gripping Victoria's shoulders. "I can feel you. I can feel you holding me." Liam stood in the background, a quiet, tired smile touching his face. He felt a small hand slip into his. Noah looked up at his father, beaming. "You fixed her, Dad." "Nobody," Liam said softly, squeezing his son's hand. "She fixed herself. I just gave her the spark." 6 months later, the landscape of their lives was unrecognizable. Vanguard Medical was under federal receivership, its stock worthless, its corrupt board dismantled. Victoria Sterling was no longer a corporate titan. Instead, she stood on a cracked sidewalk in a brutalist neighborhood in South Boston. The old, rusted auto garage had been completely renovated. A gleaming new sign hung above the pristine glass doors. The Noah Hayes and Chloe Sterling Community Neurological Clinic. Funded entirely by Victoria's remaining personal wealth, the clinic was a state-of-the-art facility, operating completely free of charge for low-income families suffering from traumatic brain and spinal injuries. Liam was the director of experimental physical therapy, operating with full board-approved medical oversight. The automatic doors slid open, and Chloe walked out. She wasn't running marathons, and she still relied on 2 sleek, custom-built forearm crutches Liam had designed for her. But she was walking. She moved with a fierce, undeniable grace, stepping into the afternoon sun. Victoria smiled, looping her arm through Liam's as they watched Noah and Chloe argue playfully over who got to unlock the clinic doors for the morning rush. The billionaire had lost an empire of steel and stock, but as she looked at her daughter standing tall in the sunlight, she knew she had never been richer. Did this story of a mother's sacrifice and a father's genius touch your heart? Sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unlikely places, and true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the people we save. If you loved this dramatic journey, please hit that like button. Share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories. Leave a comment below.